It raised back there.
First up today, we are going to get a presentation on affordable housing programs. Is that you, Amber? Okay. Step on up. Oh, no, it's just a workshop.
All right. All right. Well, good morning. Let me make sure everyone can hear me at all times. Here we go. All right, so I'll jump right in. Today we're doing an overview on the affordable housing programs that we have within the city. So the City of Grants Pass does have multiple resources that can be utilized individually or layered to incentivize housing production and preservation. Enhancing educational publications about these programs, about how these programs work and who can benefit from them, will enhance their impact and utilization in the community. So first off, I have a little infographic about how affordable housing tends to pencil out, how it can be made to happen. And it always needs layers of funding. They get federal funds, state funds, local funds layered on top of the foundation, which is affordable housing programs, development programs, and rental assistance programs. This is an infographic of our local moderate family income and how that relates to the affordability of rent and home purchase prices in Josephine County. The average asking rent in Grants Pass is $14.76 a month. As you can see, that falls right about at 100% of the moderate family income, which is fairly standard. Our minimum wage starting July 1st will be about $28,080 per year. Their affordability at minimum wage at that time will be up to $702 before becoming cost burdened. And at $1170, they will be paying 50% of their gross income on rent. At $15 an hour, they can afford up to $782 a month on rent before they're cost burdened. And at $1304, they're paying 50% of their gross income on rent. And $20 an hour can afford up to $1040 a month on rent. And at $1733, they're paying 50% of their gross income on rent. So as you can see, before the affordability limit, it is quite a struggle to get up to that average asking rent for even up to $20 an hour and above. And 27.8% of Oregon households are one-person households. So I know the thought can tend to go, well, what about the two-earner households? Well, for almost 30% of households, it is just a one-earner household. And 31.7% of households with children under the age of 18 are single-parent households as well. So we have the same numbers here, but we're comparing the median home sale price in Grants Pass. And our median home sale price as of last year was between $325,000 and $377,000. So as you can see, that doesn't even register on our scale here. It does bump way over the 120% moderate family income affordability. It's affordable to households earning $92,857 and $107,714 in that range. So that's between 157% and 183% moderate family income. And here we have a breakdown of the share of households by income level in our area. So as you can see, the majority of our households are below that 80% moderate family income. I have a breakdown of most impactful and least impactful strategies for how to support housing production. All of these strategies are extremely important, but when you're looking at which ones to prioritize, the most impactful will be towards the land acquisition and disposition. So that'd be like your land trusts or RFP off the surplus land. Then we go down to allocate funding, waiving or reducing upfront or ongoing charges on development. Down we have removing regulatory barriers, partnering to leverage efforts and resources, and lastly we have informational resources. Now again, all of these are important, but if you're looking for the most impactful, you're going to be looking at land acquisition and disposition. This is an example of one of our proposals that was submitted for Ramsey, Nebraska, and what their finance breakdown was going to be. And as you can see, generally the local incentive impact, which is going to be the red, let me see, can we see that? Yeah. So this little red section here, that's where we get to impact financially on these types of projects. It's a small piece, but it's a very important piece on whether or not these projects can and will pencil out. The rest of these break down in their commercial loans. They can utilize programs like LIFT or LAHTC, and they're broken up between soft costs and hard costs. So like the building costs, development costs, design and implementation of the project.
Amber?
Yes.
Can you just stop and go back? Because I'm really not very good with acronyms.
Sure.
And so I just want clarification on since it's such a huge part of
Yes.
it, exactly what LIFT funds and I can't even see that LHTC.
So
equity is.
LAHTC is the Low Income Housing Tax Credit Equity, and they incentivize housing programs, I believe up to 80%. And they do offer quite a bit, and that's a 21-year program for tax credits. Generally, how programs will work with that is that they will pair with a company, sometimes like Evergreen will partake in that, who will benefit from those tax credits. They'll purchase them and provide funding upfront for the development of the program. And so that's a way that groups can build housing and get that upfront cost and partner. LIFT is similar. That is the Local Innovation and Fast Track Housing Program, and that's through OHCS, the Oregon Housing and Community Services, and it supports the development of affordable housing with an emphasis on advancing efficiency and innovation in development.
Excuse me, is the tax credit more of a federal program and the LIFT is state, or is that too broad a brush?
So tax credit is through the IRS. So when asked if it's federal or state, it's specifically through the IRS.
LIFT is in Oregon, a state of Oregon program. Counselor, yes.
Okay. So as we look at our puzzle pieces to making these programs pencil out, we have our Affordable Housing Grant, which supports SDC grants and waivers. We have our Housing Opportunity Fund, which is supported by our construction excise tax. We have the Community Development Block Grant, which is known as Cdbg. We have funds from the Urban Renewal Agency. We have one-time grants such as Arpa and the Department of Administrative Services grant. And we have city surplus property. These are our financial puzzle pieces that we can offer at this time. So the Affordable Housing Grant, as I said, this was established in 2021 for the purpose of creating system development charge incentive programs for the developers of affordable housing. This grant is funded by the sale of city-owned surplus land, and currently there's about $654,000 in this fund. That'll change and go up once we complete the sale of the Ramsey, Nebraska property. The incentives under this program is that units affordable up to 100% or less of area median income can apply for a 50% system development charge waiver. There's a little bit of info on the breakdown of how that works there. Units affordable up to 80% or less of the area median income can apply for up to 100% of system development charge waivers. So one or more common local incentives asked about by affordable housing developers is system development charge waivers. That's because they know that that's where the local areas can have a big impact financially. And as an estimate for these system development charges, I brought out an example from the Ramsey, Nebraska project. This is still an estimate, but just looking at these three that were broken down, the transportation fees are looking to be about $54,702. The parks are looking to be about $62,116. And storm drain, we weren't able to calculate yet because we didn't have their area of impervious area, but it's calculated at 28 cents per square foot. But it's quite a chunk of funds that they end up having to spend on these system development charges. So these waivers can be a huge impact for them.
I have another question. I know,
Yes.
I just want to ask my questions along the way, because
Yeah.
otherwise I forget. So that doesn't include the water and sewer?
Right, so
SCC,
water
right?
and sewer will then be added on top of that. These were just the estimates we had available currently for where they're going with their project. There will be more on top of that, but would still be available.
Okay, can
to-
you give me an estimate about the cost of the water and sewer SCCs as compared to transportation and parks?
I'm not as familiar with those.
That's why I'm looking at Jason.
And I'm not sure that we really can without knowing how many units, how many fixtures, what size water meters. There's too many unknowns to be able to really pin that down at this super, super high level. They would be fairly high though.
Just looking for a comparison factor on most, what a comparison is when they're paying transportation, parks, that's right there, 100,000, 110. So I'm just kind of looking at, is it 2 times it? Is it 3 times it? That's all. I'm just kind of trying to get a general idea.
I hesitate to answer that. I think you can double it, another 100,000, but I don't think triple it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so our next fund is the Housing Opportunity Fund, which is funded by the construction excise tax that was recently passed in December of 2021. The CET provides sustainable income for this fund, as well as down payment assistance programs distributed locally through OHCS. This is a little bit of background. I'm sure you're all quite familiar since it was so recent, but our residential CET 50% goes towards incentives for the development and construction of affordable housing benefiting households at or below 80% of the area moderate income. 35% of that goes to fund programs and incentives and activities related to affordable housing benefiting households at or below 80% area moderate income. And that 15% of the residential CET goes to those local down payment programs distributed through OHCS. And of the commercial or industrial CET, 100% of those can go to city housing related programs and incentives for the development and construction of housing that's affordable up to 120% area moderate income. Our next program is Cdbg, or Community Development Block Grant. This is granted to the City of Grants Pass through the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or more known as HUD. The city receives annual funds to be used for programs and projects that benefit low to moderate income, which is 80% or below the area moderate income households, through a handful of programs. The ones related to housing, or most related to housing, are our housing weatherization programs, which can help homeowners with energy efficiency upgrades, as well as general weatherization. And housing rehabilitation, which does general rehabilitation as well as accessibility upgrades and lead paint delineation. We also have funds from the Urban Renewal Agency. The funding is used to fund urban renewal projects. The purpose of urban renewal is to improve specific areas of a city that are poorly developed or underdeveloped. One project under this funding is housing development specifically, which currently has about $3 million in allocated funding. These are for households at or below 80% of the area moderate income and can be used for pre-development assistance, completion of off-site improvements, land purchase, demolition, property tax rebate, building and development fees, or other methods as defined through a development agreement. So the areas we have that can utilize this fund would have to be in that urban renewal area. So I know it's kind of small. And there's not a lot of designated residential land, but the thing to remember too is that apartments 5 or more can be put in commercial districts through I believe it's a PUD, is that correct?
Multifamily in the GC doesn't require a PUD, but
Okay.
yeah, they're still allowed.
So a little bit of a close-up on the north side there. And we've got the Redwood Highway area. And over along the railway over here. So the next programs we have currently are these one-time grants, which are Arpa and the Department of Administrative Services $1 million grant that we received. So for ARPA, this is the American Rescue Plan Act, and that provides governments across the county or country with resources to address and respond to the economic impacts of COVID-19. Some of the housing applications under ARPA could be to respond to the public health emergency or its negative economic impacts, including assistance to households, small businesses, and nonprofits. You can incentivize development of affordable housing, supportive housing, and other services for individuals experiencing homelessness, general infrastructure projects to benefit affordable housing and qualified census tracts, rent, mortgage, or utility assistance, counseling and legal aid to prevent eviction or homelessness, specialized services for individuals with disabilities or seniors that supports their ability to access or maintain housing, and home repairs, weatherization, or other needs. These are just a few examples. How are other cities using ARPA? Many cities are using the funds for either homelessness services or affordable housing construction and preservation. More than half, about 57%, plan to use their recovery funds to expand or rehabilitate affordable housing stock. The second most common planned use was homelessness prevention and alleviation at about 53%. A couple examples, we have Portland, Oregon planning to spend more than $16 million of their city's Safe Rest on the city's Safe Rest Villages project, which is 6 outdoor shelters designed to provide safe, clean, and secure access to food and shelter for people experiencing homelessness. And the city of Baltimore is providing funds for capital projects that transform vacant properties into reliable, affordable housing. We also have the Department of Administrative Services one-time grant. Oh, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. So the Housing Advisory Committee has recommended to the council to set aside roughly $4 million in ARPA funds to subsidize, as defined by ARPA guidelines, the costs associated with development of affordable housing projects, with the creation and distribution of a grant application process created within 90 days of council approval. These grant proposals are to be reviewed and recommended to the council by the HAC. They did have a few follow-up motions regarding to how that money could be spent as we get closer to the deadline in regards to housing, including infrastructure throughout the urban growth boundary in strategic locations to jumpstart development. And remaining ARPA funds also to be utilized to purchase land for affordable housing projects within the urban growth boundary. This could be utilized to jumpstart a land trust or land bank as well. And there was one more motion to recommend the City Council the application of ARPA funds to the development of a housing program and incentive marketing plan to help get these programs marketed properly and update the website and such. All right, and so the Department of Administrative Services grant, Senate Bill 5561, allocated $1 million general fund grant to the City of Grants Pass to be used for programs or services that address housing insecurity, lack of affordable housing, and homelessness. The grant agreement requires the city to submit annual progress reports to the DAS until grant funds are fully expended, including a project description, timeline for project deliverables, funds spent to date, and project milestones. The city cannot transfer any of its rights or obligations without prior written consent from DAS. To date, the City Council has not made any commitments for the utilization of these grant monies, and this funding will terminate on June 30th of 2023. So moving on, we have city surplus lands. Did we have any questions on that before I move on? Yes.
So the city cannot transfer any of its rights or obligations without prior written consent from DAS. What does that mean?
I believe it's talking about transferring to, I'm looking to Brad to help me out a little bit on this one. I believe it's talking a couple of things. Passing it off to sub-programs would be one we'd need to get permission for. And also if we were wanting to do a joint project with another city, if we had another city close to us that received funds as well. Does that sound correct, Brad?
I think that's a reasonable interpretation. You know, the city hasn't received money through DAS before. This is very much a one-time initiative. We don't really have a history of working with their contracts division there at DAS. Either Augustus or myself or Amber, we would probably need to get a hold of DAS contracts people and make sure that we're clear on what that particular phrase means. What Amber has on the slide is taken directly from the grant agreement that the city entered into with DAS. So I think we would, to be safe, since it's a different agency that we have not received funding from before, would want to explore that more.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So our last piece to the puzzle is our city surplus land. The city does periodically sell city-owned land for development as affordable housing. Properties can be sold anywhere from full market value and below to help incentivize developers to build affordable housing. The City Council has designated creating a land bank program as a priority in the 2022 strategic planning. I wanted to point out, as an example, the City of Eugene does have a city-run land bank that we can look to for how they've run their program. The acquisition process involves selection of an appropriate site, neighborhood outreach, environmental review, and other due diligence activities, and a review by an evaluation committee, and the City Council then makes final decisions on land acquisition for that one. Benefits of an affordable housing land bank. They can greatly lower the costs for the owner of planned developments. In interviews with developers, developers did list land donation or write down as among the most critical tools for supporting affordable housing and production. You can manage land as a portfolio of properties, employing a strategy of buying when land prices are low and holding for desired market conditions in the future. We can control the location of the development within the city, and we can leverage federal, philanthropic, or private, or other sources of funding for land acquisition. By comparison, the City of Bend does occasionally utilize surplus land to RFP off for affordable housing, much like we do. Let's see. And did we have a question or? No? Okay. And some of our code tools that we have within our code are our ADU code, accessory dwelling unit code. We do have a pre-approved plan for 850 square feet, and they also get water, sewer, and storm development charge waivers. We also have an updated cottage code that provides for cottage cluster development. So looking at our main programs here and their tenure, the Affordable Housing Grant for SDC waivers, funds are available as the sale of surplus lands allow. The Housing Opportunity Fund, funded by this construction excise tax, funds are received quarterly. The city shall review the CET program every 5 years to evaluate its impact on housing, and this program currently is set to sunset with an opportunity for renewal in 2026. The Community Development Block Grant, we receive those funds annually. Urban Renewal Agency is funded by tax increment financing, and it's used to fund those urban renewal projects. Our one-time grants are one-time grants, so they are we're not getting any renewals unless we hear otherwise. And city surplus property is only available while the city owns surplus lots that are usable for housing development. So here's where this is our potential for a land bank if we wanted to pursue that. Impacts of our programs.
Amber?
Yes,
I
absolutely.
have a question, last slide. On the city surplus property, when you have a land bank, how are other cities replenishing that land bank? I realize.
So the main thing they do is when they're selling surplus land, that those funds go back to the land bank to purchase new surplus lands or lands in that land bank specifically. And then some of them do have set aside funding, like an annual funding from the general fund to help with adding to the bank to purchase. But also we can utilize funds like if we wanted to jumpstart with Arpa or the DAS fund. You can set aside money from Community Development Block Grant for land purchase. You can use Urban Renewal Agency for land purchase within the Urban Renewal District. There's a couple different options for that.
And by doing that, does the city find it's in a competitive position with other buyers and actually inflates, I want to say stabilizes or possibly even inflates the price of the property because of competition?
I see. So generally, the properties that get purchased through the land bank are going to be tax delinquent properties, foreclosure properties, or properties that are, sorry, I'm blanking on the word. They need to be demolished.
Okay.
So we would come in and rehab those properties, take them on, and get them ready for development, and that gives us a lower cost that we can slowly work on.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. So impacts for these programs, affordable housing funding can be used for rentals, ownership, land trusts, and shelters. We can fund acquisition, rehabilitation, pre-development, construction, and preservation. And we're happy to be the first money in to help these developers qualify for additional leverage resources such as LIHTC or LIFT. By layering multiple funding types, developers can close that gap to affordability becoming possible on new developments. Property owners can utilize programs to bring current units into affordability or maintain existing affordability through rehabilitation and weatherization, helping the community not to lose existing affordable units and allowing homeowners to age in place. And funded properties are subject to deed restrictions for some of our programs, covenants, or other mechanisms that help to ensure the funded properties remain sustainably affordable to our residents. So we have a little bit of market dynamics on how affordable housing comes into existence. Generally, the new market supply is made at about 140 to 120% area moderate income affordability. And then those properties depreciate, and then they can fall down to the 100% to 80%. And we have new subsidized supply, which is generally rentals or Habitat for Humanity types builds, coming in at the 80 to 60%. And you can see, normally we see filtering depreciation as homes age, and there can also be gentrification pushing things back up. But when we have a housing market like we have with a shortage of housing, this doesn't work the same, and homes tend to fail to depreciate down to that 100% to 80%. And so that's why we're kind of stuck where we're at with our shortage of supply. And so that's important to keep in mind when we're looking at where our missing middle housing and missing low-income housing is. It's just not depreciating like it should. So our available funding, I just bringing it back to these programs. Again, the Affordable Housing Grant for SDC waivers has currently about $654,000 in this fund. The Housing Opportunity Fund, funded by the CET, receives quarterly. The year 2023 budget projects $75,000 revenue per quarter, or about $150,000 per year for residential and $150,000 per year for commercial. The Community Development Block Grant, we get about $150,000 per year to use for those two programs that we mentioned. The Urban Renewal Agency has about $3 million for housing allocated funding. Our one-time grants for Arpa and DAS, we have the $1 million for the DAS grant, and the HAC is recommending that we set aside $4 million in Arpa funds towards housing programs and incentives. And we have city surplus property, which again is only available while the city owns surplus lots that are usable and set aside for a land bank for affordable housing. So in terms of all our programs, we have a few comparisons for what other cities are doing. The city of Bend does utilize surplus property to request for proposals of affordable housing. They do utilize the construction excise tax for affordable housing. They do have system development charge exemptions. They have community development block grant as well, and they utilize low income property tax exemptions. The city of Tigard does exemptions from system development charges. They have exemptions from city property taxes, and they have tax increment financing for assistance of programs in the downtown area. And the city of Albany has the community development block grant as well. They're scaling their single family development charges to the size of homes as opposed to flat rates. They have urban renewal funding, and they also have donated surplus land to Habitat for Humanity in the past.
Can I just jump in here?
Sure.
Have we also, didn't we, when we set up our SDCs, base our SDCs on the size of the homes? So is that kind of the same thing that they're doing then as what we've done? Scaling single-family system development charges to the size of the home. So that's basically what we did, if I'm correct.
I believe so. I would need to see their program, but I believe so.
Yeah, and that can help incentivize building smaller homes to hopefully get a bit more affordable single-family homes. So next steps, we will continue working with Eco Northwest, which is our consultant on the housing production strategies. We want to finalize consolidating housing incentive application process so that we can get all of these programs on annual RFP process or application process. Staff is going to focus on creating marketing materials that present a unified comprehensive housing program. And we would like to develop and market informational brochure and renovated webpage for the housing information. We would like to hold a workshop dedicated to the topic of land banking. The land bank was one of the City Council's adopted 2022 strategic plan priorities, and staff, that's me, will research and formulate recommendations for a local land bank. I do have quite a bit of that already ready to go. So our call to action is at council's discretion, and alternatives are to hold further workshops dedicated to council identified affordable housing topics such as land banking.
Thank you, Amber. Council, do you have questions? Valerie, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Amber, for that information. A lot of good information on that. I know that Eco Northwest is sponsoring a forum on April 15th, and I have not found it anywhere advertised on our website.
So it's just the HAC meeting, so it's not a full forum, it's just the open
But I
public
was
HAC
told at the
meeting.
forum, because I'm on the committee, that they were welcoming local builders to come in and have a discussion and understand it. So I just think that, because I have had actually some builders come and get hold of me, and I've been trying to direct them to something, and there's nothing there. So I just wanted to make sure that it is from 9 to 12 on April 15th, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct,
And
yeah.
it is a continuation of that. Also, I tried to find the housing needs analysis online because I just kind of wanted to give an idea, because they asked me how many homes were needed and I couldn't find that. So if you could get that to me so I could get that out, that would help a lot.
Yes.
And I do also know that the Chamber of Commerce is also hoping to have a roundtable discussion with some of our local builders, because I think that the only thing that scares me is that a lot of affordable housing, which I know we need and I'm really anxious to get it moving, takes deed restrictions. And I don't think a lot of people understand the deed restrictions and when you're going to that affordable housing at the level that we're trying to do, you saw how much the lift funds and the tax credits are needed to push those forward. Well, the people that can build those are people who have bonding and insurance far beyond what our local builders have the ability to do. I can think of one, maybe two builders in our community that could even touch those. So I just want to somehow find a way to incentivize those people in our community as to what they can do and how they can learn to build duplexes, triplexes, if that means deed restrictions. How does that finance? What do banks look at? That's why I've been trying to look for a financing piece in all of this, and to bring in some bankers to say, what do bankers, what do they suggest we do to get those people that are local building the duplexes and triplexes to have some incentives to also increase our housing supply, because it goes beyond just that affordable housing piece, because those are so expensive. In Medford this last weekend in their Tribune, they're getting ready to go for those tax credits, the same ones we're going after, for a 115 unit project. Those pencil out to $417,000 per unit. I mean, that is extremely expensive for affordable housing. And so all of that has to be subsidized. So, we need to get local solutions as well. So I just want to make sure that we're keeping those people in the loop as we move forward. Thank you. No, that wasn't, the question was, my question was about the forum on the 15th, and can we make that available on the site to let people know that
Yeah, I'll
they
make
can
sure
attend?
that that's up on the agenda.
All right, thank you.
Rick?
Amber, I was wondering if it might be possible to produce a memo, like with the spreadsheet with all the different programs that are available, and then showing when those programs started, like the CET tax was last year, but not really go back, I don't know, 5 or 10 years, show how many people or businesses have utilized those funds and the approximate value. Because if we have programs out there that have been out there 5 or 10 years and only 2 people have used them, and the dollar amount has not been that significant, do we really want to continue with those programs and to really look at if the program in that instance has been effective?
Sure. Yeah, we have quite a few that are pretty fresh, but I can put it all together for you.
We would like to have that as a overall council request, because that would be a council memo for that information.
Okay, is the,
I just clarify one more time what we're getting, so that I know what I'm approving.
I thought it'd be interesting to know a summary of the programs that we have out there, how many people have utilized those programs, when their date of inception was been, but not to go back more than 10 years, and to show the dollar amounts issued, because if you're only issuing $1,000 or $2,000 and you've only had 5 takers, is that program really worth it? And as we look at the different programs that we do have, which would give us also the opportunity to analyze how we want to allocate our monies and if a program should continue.
No, I agree with that, and I'd also like to add, because we have done a number of things. We do have the ADUs, how much have they been utilized, how much money has been spent in that. Another thing we did a couple years ago was we offered an upfront financing, if I'm not mistaken, for the cost of the SDCs, or we talked about it at one point in time about upfront, letting them put the cost at the end of the program as opposed to having to pay it up front. We did, I think we passed that, but has anybody taken advantage of it? I mean, it would just be nice to know what we have done and what has been utilized. I think that would be a good thing to know.
all right, we have 2 people who are interested in that. I caution we might spend a lot of time having staff look at what's been done in the past rather than making a plan to go forward. Are there other counselors who are interested in getting data about the past programs? Okay, we got 3. That's not a majority. 4? Well, half the council's interested. I'm not sure if DJ's, is he online today? Yeah, he texts me sometimes, but I haven't heard from him today. All right, well, sounds like at least half the council's interested in getting some past data. DJ said he was not, but
Don't we
I'd
need a majority to get things done?
yeah, I mean, this is kind of tricky territory, I guess. I'm not sure how much, time is going to be invested. Maybe some things may be easier than others. What do you think, Aaron?
Well, I think sometime it's gonna, talking about ADUs, and I mean, we have records for almost all of those things when it comes to SDCs and affordable housing. I think we all know that we haven't had a lot of affordable housing projects come through. So we'll need to do the research, et cetera. And I think of the programs that we have, you'll see a general theme that we have a lot of good programs that every other community has. And one may not be producing as much as another, but that's pretty standard. So maybe one of those incentives isn't used by 90% of the people, but it's used by at least 10%. That's a positive. It's all part of a package. There are certain packages, and there was a slide towards the beginning that showed most impact versus least impact. And so if you're looking at wanting information on how to allocate your resources, could you go back to, it's that one? Yeah, you know which one I'm talking about. So if you go back to that slide there, if you're trying to figure out, well, which programs do we need to allocate our resources towards, take a look at the ones that are darker, that are more impactful. It's that land acquisition and disposition. It's the making sure that we have allocated funding for it. It's then a waiver, reduction of charges. And so looking at that there, I think gives you what you're looking for from a standpoint of where do we get our best return on our investment. But if you'd like us to go and take a look at that, we will have little activity, but it will take some time to put that stuff together for you.
Rick?
So in reality, I'm not looking for an inventory with all the finite details. I'm looking for generalizations. So just in general, if you're saying, oh, I'm aware of this, and I know there's been probably 3, and I'm willing to accept probably 3, activities, and they're probably around the $1,000 or $10,000 price range, that's fine. Not looking for an inventory per se, but it's just a general knowledge to see what type of activity does occur with the program in the general dollar amount.
So based on the proposed motion that I have, my understanding of what we would come back to you with a memo is we would take a look at the programs that we have in place that we just highlighted today. We would do a historical back look at, and some of these programs are new. Like we said, the CET, that's brand new. We're just now collecting money, so there's not much to report there. And that's a program for funding. That's that allocate funding, extremely important, but it's not an actual program. It's a program that provides resources for the ones that people can utilize. So that one, there's not much that one's just a funding issue. We'll go back on all of those 7 programs that we have, and we will say historically, what have we done for SDCs linked to affordable housing? What have we done for community development block grant dollars linked to affordable housing? So we try to report that out. We would add the ADU thing, which is not necessarily affordable housing. That's a density issue within the city, because most ADUs are not linked to affordable housing and deed restrictions. It's just a density issue with regards to providing density within the city limits. So we can add that. We can add a historical back look at how many ADUs have been developed since we created the ADU ordinance, and include that with a back look of the programs that we've initiated, and take a look at that. That's the way I would see the memo, if that's what council would like. If I'm on track, great. If you want to still continue it, great. If not, please let me know.
I mean, I guess I personally kind of question what the point is, given that we know we haven't been doing enough in the past because we have a huge lack of housing. Staff is saying they're going to work on marketing materials and improving the website because there may be a lack of information about some of the programs we've had in the past, which to me, as a marketing person, I mean, if a program hasn't been well advertised in the past, the data about whether or not it was effective isn't really accurate. Some things like the ADU ordinance, I mean, if 50, 500 people have built an ADU, are we going to stop allowing ADUs as a result of this data? So I guess I don't want to keep you from getting the data, but I don't want to cause staff to do a lot of undue work for something that I'm not sure what the value is.
Let me rephrase the question then. Does staff view, in other words, if we have, instead of 3 programs out there, which some cities have, I want to say we have 5 or 7 programs. I want to say, to take that one step further, if we have 15 programs, I think for staff to managing 15 programs is too much. So as staff, do you see the number of programs we have maybe are too many and could be consolidated and are not effective? And maybe that would be the question rather than the inventory. Does staff see we have too many, or should there be a consolidation? And are the programs, from your viewpoint, effective?
I think the programs are effective as they've been shown to be proven effective. If you take a look at the 6 programs that we have up there, if you dove into other municipalities and their programs, it would look very similar to those 6. They may be titled differently, but the tools themselves are there. So some of those tools are need and require active participation by the city. Some of those require active participation by the user. That is, once you have an SDC bank established, we can do some advertising, but it requires a developer that meets the criteria to utilize the SDC. Versus, say, a land bank program that takes that takes action by the city to actually move forward to identify, develop, purchase, define what that is. So from a bandwidth perspective, some of those things are more passive than others, and I think that overall it's a good package. And if we were to utilize bandwidth, utilizing the bandwidth and or resources towards those things that provide the most return on your investment, and focusing on that would be a positive.
Vanessa, then Valerie.
Amber, would you feel comfortable enough to tell us if you felt a program was a waste of our time and it wasn't effective?
Yeah, I would.
Okay. Does that help clarify your concern? Okay.
Valerie.
And I was just going to add, I mean, I don't want us going back in the back, like you said, it doesn't make any good to dredge up whatever. I mean, so in terms of having to spend a lot of time, that's not my intention at all. I think maybe the best way to do it is when we go to the forum or when we talk and have the roundtable, bring in local builders and say, have you used these programs? Do you see these as a benefit, and how could you use those to help us move forward? Because I have talked to a number of builders and they want to, they just don't know what's there. So it would be interesting to know what they know about. So that might be the place to put it, is just to have the builders talk. Tell us about this program and what, and how you, are you aware of it, and have you used any of it, or what would help you to use it. So I think that's may be the direction to go forward as opposed to backward.
Well, I think this presentation already included a suggestion that staff was going to work on beefing up marketing these programs. So do we need any further direction on that, or are you satisfied? Okay. Any other questions? I know we have Doug here from the Housing Advisory Committee. Did you want to talk about your motions at all? Okay.
So to address your point a little bit, Rick, or Vanessa's point, if the HAC saw something that wasn't worthwhile, we'd let you know. No problem with that. And I think, to my memory, there's 2 things up there that have been running long enough for there to be any kind of history on them. The Cdbg block grant's been running for a long time, so you could see history on that. And it's not a very large lump of money, and most of it's restricted by the federal government, so you don't have a lot of say in what happens with it. And the Urban Renewal Agency is the other one that's been running for enough years to say what the history is. And I think we all know that there's been very little, if any of that. So I don't think there's a lot of use in going back and looking at what programs are working or not. There just hasn't been enough going on. So I hope that helps. So the Housing Advisory Committee made a motion recently to recommend to council that you all set aside $4 million of ARPA funds for housing-related projects, affordable housing, workforce-related projects. And we'd love for you to consider that strongly. We understand that those dollars have to be spent under ARPA guidelines, so we're not asking for anything other than that. We do recognize that there's a timeline restriction on getting those dollars spent. And because we're asking you to just put the money aside for affordable housing, and we don't know what that means in the future until somebody applies for that money, we're sort of asking you to do something without any parameters around it, without any timelines around it. We ask that you put that money, that ARPA money, into affordable housing. And if it isn't all spent by a certain date to be determined by you all or recommended by staff, that whatever's left over from that money be used to purchase land for a land bank. So as a fallback position to make sure that the money gets spent within the proper timeline, you use the money to buy land at the end of this whole timeline project, if that makes sense or not.
Made sense to me. Questions? Brian?
I just had a point of clarification with Amber. On the CET on slide 14, down at the very bottom, the commercial CET, and I don't know, this might just be a clerical error, but when council passed that, the AMI was actually 100%. It was amended from 120 down to 100%. So I've seen that come up a couple times now, and I actually went back and watched the video of that meeting. So just want to make sure that that's been recorded correctly in our records at 100%.
I have a question of that too, because I do know that the state has put down as 120% considerable in their affordable housing. So does our local override the state, or does the state override the local? I guess that's my question.
If I'm correct, the state sets the upper limit, and we can be more restrictive, but we can't be more lenient.
Okay.
Any further questions for Doug or Amber? Joel?
So Doug, give me an example of what do you think a optimum, this isn't the right word, but a bid or proposal that the city would entertain with that $4 million, and what would be one that would be less competitive?
Optimum development would be, let's use the Habitat for Humanity project, and I don't remember the name of the street that's happening on, it's Redwood Avenue area. They would come to us, the Housing Advisory Committee, with a grant proposal asking for $800,000 for some type of, or some portion of the work they're doing for those 7 houses or 8 houses, I don't remember how many they're doing. And then we would look at that at the Housing Advisory Committee, does it fit whatever parameters, which usually the ones that are most important are, does it fit the AMI thing and the low income part? And then we would say yay or nay, and we'd pass that on to you, and then you would look at it the same way, based on the pre-existing grant parameters. That would be an example of something that's in the pipeline that might be asking for money from some of these programs in the future. And then a less likely example, the All Care Community Foundation was looking to develop a cottage development out in the Cloverlawn area, in urban growth boundary area, that was going to need an awful lot of street improvement, not just around its only property, but also along a more major road there. And because of that street improvement, it didn't look very viable because it was a huge amount of money for just 12 units. And so that would be an example of a less viable project that might ask you for money. You'd be spending a lot of money for a smaller number of units, and you wouldn't be getting very much for it. So that would be an example of not such a good project. Yeah.
I have a question just about the ARPA funds, since those have a timeline. I don't know if Brad or Amber, but the timeline for spending the ARPA funds is coming up faster than we're probably going to get a lot of things built. Can it just be used to purchase the land if that land is to be used in the future? Aaron's saying yes. Okay.
As long as it's deed restricted for affordable housing, it needs to be very clear that that land is specifically for affordable housing for ARPA to allow us to use it in that way.
Okay. So if the city were to purchase lands for land bank that was to be used for that purpose, then if we didn't get something built for a few more years, it'd be okay. All right. Brian?
And just to further clarify on that, around the timelines for the ARPA funds, correct me if I'm wrong, but they need to be allocated by June 2024, but they don't need to be spent until June 2026. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and projects don't have to be finished by those dates either.
If I could just tack on to that, though, my understanding on the Treasury final rule, there's a commentary that the Department of Treasury put on that, is that a grant or a loan to a nonprofit is not considered an expenditure. Meaning you could commit it as a grant or a loan by 24, but it's not considered an actual expenditure which is due by that 26. you actually have to have spent it on something specific. You can't just say, city, we're going to give X nonprofit so much dollar in that loan. That doesn't qualify as the final expenditure, which is due by 26.
So they would have to spend it by 2026 to be an expenditure? If let's say we gave $1 million to a nonprofit, and they were going to land bank or build something with it, would they have to spend it by 2026 on the actual project?
Well, when you say spend it, I mean, I think either, maybe the next discussion will be better with either Augustus or Susan may be able to clarify that. I just know in terms of the city's role, that loan or a grant would not qualify as an expenditure by the 26 deadline. So in terms of your question, Mayor, about whether they have to spend it, yes. I believe the answer is yes, but we should probably get more clarification on that at the next topic.
Okay. Did you have a question, Brian? No? Anybody else have a question? Valerie?
Yeah, I just want clarification. I guess it will come with time, is exactly when we have deed restrictions, who manages those and how they come to be. I mean, that's just a question that I have in general.
Good question. Brad?
So those are a private enforcement. The city doesn't, for example, have any legal say over CC&Rs for a private developer or something like that. But once they're recorded and are running with the deed, we do this. We work with this all the time. With easements, with other types of access points, or and as you pointed out, Councilor, they are more and more frequently being used with affordable housing. In terms of the enforcement, they're typically just, when you're buying that property and you're sitting at the closing and the papers show, they show you all of the paperwork, and there's a restriction that is revealed there at the time of closing. The city doesn't have somebody sitting at the table there. So that is, it happens really through the real estate transaction process. In terms of once we're aware if there's a role that the city plays in issuance of a permit related to that, then that's where where our role comes in. But we don't in community development. We don't have anyone who's overseeing that deed restriction and tracking all those. That really just happens through the transaction process during each real estate transaction. Does that get to your point?
Well, I guess it does. I guess it's just, I just don't know who monitors to make sure that it stays in that state. I mean, if somebody is on the, whatever, putting down that deed, that they know the restrictions, but I was curious as to who monitors it to make sure that it stays in that state. That's my question. So it's whoever owns the property, if they've put a deed restriction, and like I said, I'm just trying to understand this, they put a deed restriction saying that they're going to keep it at 60% or 80% of the AMI forever for 20 years, then that person who holds the deed is responsible for making sure that they do that, is what I'm just trying to say is.
I guess it's sort of, think of it as a first right of refusal example, maybe, where, and then through that process, if the seller does not disclose that, it will get disclosed in the escrow process. And then someone like, let's say we had a first right of refusal on a piece of property, the escrow would inform us of that. Or so it would be, there's through like Brad mentioned, through real estate transactions, et cetera, that's one opportunity for us to maintain or make sure that the initial deed and the spirit of the deed is complied with.
Can I add something? Valerie, to your point about deed restrictions and who would enforce them during ownership, Because I think that's your point. Your point is if I own it for 20 years, at year 10, I decide to charge full rent, no one's going to know about it until I go to sell the place 10 years later. I think we still need to do a little research on that. It happens. I don't remember how Ashland said they were handling it, but it does happen. And I believe HUD handles it with HUD-specific projects. A little research, and we can probably answer that question about deed restrictions and who enforces those during ownership, in the middle of ownership.
Yeah, I guess my point is that I know the big projects, anything that's HUD or from whom I know it's the state. I do know they monitor them, but I also know that when you have smaller ones that they're not necessarily covered. So I guess that's bringing me to the point of if this affordable housing is really just through HUD and through those bigger agencies with that large funding, I think that's great, and I think it's wonderful, but I don't know if the money is there to really do that. And so I think personally that our housing crunch can be solved with local people doing local things to make it happen too. And I just don't want to just put all our money and all our energy into these big, huge development corporations that are kind of coming in and save us by building affordable housing, because they could have been doing it all along, and they haven't been doing it. So that's all I'm looking out for.
Yeah, let us do a little research and get back to you on that. See how
Thank you.
Ashland handles it and any other municipalities handle it.
And I have been delving into that a little bit. So we have been in contact with a couple groups for ongoing income verification and how annual reporting can be done for rentals specifically. The escrow piece does generally work for homes that are affordable in terms of purchase price for homeowners. But yes, there is definitely some stuff in the works for how we would be maintaining and monitoring rental properties and their affordability as well. It would look something like an annual reporting.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? All right, thanks to you both. And council, did you want to have any discussion on this or wait until after we have the ARPA? Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up 2 points. On slide 26, it talks very briefly about the ADUs and how we have the pre-approved plan for an 850 square foot ADU. There's been talk many times about having at least 1 or 2 more pre-approved plans at smaller square footages that would be more viable for more homeowners in town. And I know that it is on our strategic planning list with 5 councilors supporting a more robust ADU program development for this year. So as we move forward in the year, I would like to see that, either get on the agenda or just, have staff work on some more pre-approved plans at smaller square footages, maybe a 650 square foot and a 450 square foot would be good. So there's more options for people that want to use ADUs. So that's the first point. I guess if I could stop there for now.
Rob?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with Brian, and I'd like to actually, we don't have to answer today, but we could. What actually is the smallest allowable ADU? I'd like to start there, something that's the lowest possible barrier for a homeowner to jump in at. So whatever the smallest is, I'd like to start there and have a couple plans and then go up. Just make it as easy as possible for more people to employ them.
There's no minimum size in the statute. It's all building code driven. So it's really whatever square footage you need to get a restroom, kitchen, and sleeping area, those 3. So yeah.
Then some creative architect, I'd like to see whatever the smallest, cheapest one that could be put in and start and go up from there, Yeah.
Sure.
I feel like we've had a discussion about that before, and I don't really remember where we ended up on that. But additional plans for ADUs, was that something?
I think we talked in general about that, and I think we ended up sort of where we are at this moment right now. What I think would be best is, if that is the consensus of council, to just go ahead and make a motion that we develop and bring forward additional plans that start with a very small square footage up to the 850 square foot. So we can provide maybe 2 or 3 more plans that are in between there.
All right, council, is that something you wanted to consider? More ADU plans? All right. Do you want us to formalize how many, or?
I don't know if that's necessary, and I think we can I think we have the spirit of what you're looking for, and I think we can hit the mark on that.
All right, sounds good, thank you. Any other discussion? All right, I think we're gonna, go ahead, Brian.
Sorry, I had 2 things. The second thing is on, where is it? Slide 17, it talks about the Urban Renewal Agency. And we just talked about Urban Renewal Agency last week. And one of the things I brought up was reallocating some of the funding from the convention center line, which has already been reduced from 18 million to 7 million, and reallocating the remaining 7 million to the affordable housing line. And when I brought it up, it was either last week or the week before, we decided that this was the time to bring it up again. So I'm bringing it up again now. And correct me if I'm wrong, Aaron, but I think the Urban Renewal Agency total revenue over its life is going to be over $100 million. Does that sound accurate? Okay. And we only have 3 million of that 100+ million allocated to the biggest problem the city has. So I would advocate to reallocate the remaining 7 million from Convention Center to the affordable housing line in the Urban Renewal District. And that's not a motion. I'm interested in what the rest of council thinks.
Did anyone want to talk on that? Vanessa?
Yeah, I second that. Keep it simple. And I also do support the next steps of staff recommendations to developing a brochure, webpage, and holding additional workshop on the topic of land making as well.
Brian?
I just have a question. Was the 3 million allocated out of the whole 100 million?
So if you look at the actual numbers of the millions, the 100 is future capacity. I think like for like, it was like maybe 50 or 80 million compared to the 3. So the 3 million of the total allocated resources, it is $3 million for housing.
Did you have your hand up, Brian?
Well, yeah, just so we don't keep kicking the can down the road, I guess I'll go ahead and move to reallocate the convention center funding to the affordable housing for the Urban Renewal District.
Second from Vanessa. Valerie?
Well, I'm just going to say, I don't remember that particular, I remember the discussion. I don't remember specifically saying the money from the convention center was going to be moved over. I don't. I remember having the discussion about the urban renewal and that the fact that housing needs to be a big priority, and I don't dispute that, but I hate to just right now jump on because I don't remember that piece of the conversation. And I'm just saying that. I don't remember that specific piece.
Do you want it to go to a business meeting?
I would feel better if it went to a business meeting myself.
Brian, would you like that to be your motion, that we put it on a business meeting?
Sure, I'll amend to make that motion to move it forward to a business meeting.
Okay. Second from Vanessa, thank you. Any discussion on that?
Mayor?
Yo.
I just wanted a clarification on the business meeting. The motion, if it would have passed today, it would have needed to go to a business meeting anyhow, because that's a modification of the plan. So we'd have to go through that process. So on the business meeting, is it just to discuss, or is it for you to consider the modification of the plan?
I think it would be to make that modification to $7 million.
Okay.
I just have a question. It's my understanding that we have to modify the plan if we're going to put Caveman Pool back into that. Am I correct?
The plan itself has been modified to include Caveman Pool. It's the expansion of the urban growth boundary. It's expansion of the plan. You're right, you have to modify the plan. We have to annex that portion into it. and we could do that at that time also, or at another date, but yes, that would need to be annexed in.
I'm just saying, since that's something that we're going to be discussing soon, I would just as soon discuss them all at the same time than piecemeal, pull it up and pull it up and pull it up, personally.
Okay, so we have a motion to send to a business meeting, modifying the URA plan to reallocate convention center money. Any discussion? All right, Brian, you made the motion. How do you vote?
Yes.
Vanessa?
Yes.
Rob?
Yes.
Rick?
Yes.
Joel?
Yes, and I'd also like to see how we're going to spend that $3 million and how effective it is as well.
Kurt?
Yes.
Valerie?
I'm not sure that I know. So the motion was
Just to have a business meeting discussion and vote about modifying the URA plan to reallocate $7 million from the convention center to housing. It doesn't mean that you're approving that transfer. It just means that we're going to have that discussion at a business meeting.
Well, I'm going to say what I said earlier. It makes no sense to me to have only that be discussed when we have bigger things on our plate to discuss at the same time. So I would think that if we were going to do it, the motion would be to modify the plan and then do all of the things that we wanted to do at that time. So I'm going to vote no.
Okay, DJ?
Yeah, at this point, I think it's logical to have the discussion for this of it at this time. More information and a healthy discussion. There's no hidden meetings, or I'll vote yes.
Okay. Your speech was somewhat garbled, but I heard you say you were voting yes. We didn't necessarily hear your full comment, DJ. Motion passes.
That's good enough, yes.
Okay, motion passes 7-1. I think we have a bad audio connection with you, DJ. Brian?
I was just going to ask Valerie if we should make a motion to also have the discussion about the Caveman pool annexation on a business meeting as well. What do you think, Val?
Well, I think it would make sense if we're going to the time to open up that discussion and make a motion that we would do that simultaneously. So I'll make a motion that we at the same time discuss the annexation of Caveman Pool.
Second from Brian. Any discussion on that? All right, Valerie, how do you vote?
Yes.
Brian?
Yes.
Vanessa?
Yes.
Rob?
Yes.
Rick?
Yes.
Joel?
Yes.
Kurt?
Yes.
DJ?
Yeah.
I think that was a yes, 8-0. We'll discuss Caveman Pool at the same time. Okay. We also, what just came up, there was another thing that you mentioned, Joel. Oh, okay, right, that Joel wanted more discussion about how the 3 million was going to be used, and I think, you're spot on there that we have not yet really had that discussion about what to use the money for, and we're definitely at the point now where we, whether you decide to change the 7 million funding or not, we do have 3 million allocated for something, and we need to figure out a program. So is there any further discussion on a land program right now? Okay. Some of this may resurface again after our next presentation on ARPA funding. Thank you, Amber. And next up, we have the ARPA funding discussion. That's the American Rescue Plan Act. Adam is going to join us virtually for that one, it seems like.
Yes, good afternoon, Mayor and Council, and I suppose I'll just wait until my presentation is enlarged on your screen.
It's a little hard to hear, Adam. Is that on our end?
Can you hear me a little better now?
Yes, that's much better. While we're waiting, DJ had actually sent me a question on the last discussion that I said I would ask, but I failed to. Do we know whether any of the pre-approved ADU plans have been built?
Only 20.
Okay. About 20 of those, DJ. Thank you. All right, Adam, whenever you're ready, we can see the screen now.
Wonderful. Need to provide a presentation as a starting point to allocating some of our American Rescue Plan Act funds. Subject and summary. First, we'll do a brief ARPA review. Look at a couple of examples of eligible uses under the 4 pillars of the plan, or the act, excuse me. We'll review the worksheet of individual preferences, which were sent out to counselors, and then final direction being to allocate some or all of the ARPA funds at council's discretion. And of course, your relationship to council goals is that allocating these funds in some way touches all of council's goals. Starting with the ARPA review, just a quick reminder that the funds must be obligated by December 2024 and spent by December of 2026. However, there are some reporting and accounting implications as we have to do periodic reports to the Treasury, as well as some fiscal year auditing considerations where if we're going to use ARPA funds on something that happened in a particular fiscal year, it would be good to go ahead and have that identified before we close the year and get that audited. Back in October 6, 2021 is when Council allocated $3 million to eligible water capital projects like the water treatment plant replacement project. On November 29th, 2021, the Housing Advisory Committee presented some motions on allocations of ARPA, including affordable housing projects, investments in urban growth boundary infrastructure to jumpstart development, as well as purchasing land for affordable housing projects. Following that information was the detailed ARPA survey results, which returned 3 main priorities from the community, which included infrastructure investments, services to disproportionately impacted communities, and also to address negative economic impacts. Then on March 7th, just a little less than a month ago, staff presented some suggestions from our perspective, some things that we looked into, including some city costs that could be ARPA reimbursable if council so decided. I did want to, just as a reminder, note that things like COVID supplies, the isolation and quarantine time, portable toilets, as well as administrative time are ARPA reimbursable, and if not paid for using ARPA funds, then those costs would be paid for either by taxpayers or utility customers, depending on where the expenditure occurred. Moving on into several examples of eligible uses. This information is provided by the Department of Treasury, as we have 4 main pillars, including public sector revenues, public health and economic response, premium pay for essential workers, as well as water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. For public health and economic response, that would be to address complications on impacted households, and there are some examples there for your consideration, as well as disproportionately impacted households. There's also addressing impacts on small businesses, disproportionately impacted small businesses, impacts on nonprofits, and disproportionately impacted nonprofits. As well as impacted industries and investments in capital expenditures. So a lot of options there under this particular category. Another one of the pillars is premium pay for essential workers, which is for those up to $13 per hour of bonus pay with a maximum of $25,000 per worker. For individuals who made more than that would require written justification of why that was being extended to those with a higher salary. and is included but not limited to the following, such as staff at nursing home, workers at farms and food production facilities, janitors and sanitation workers, truck drivers, transit staff, public health and safety staff, child care workers and educators, and social service or human services staff. Another one of the pillars is revenue replacements, where cities may use the funds for general governmental services to the extent of the reduction in revenue due to COVID. Now, as previously presented to council, during the first round of calculations, we did not qualify for several factors. There have been some updates to this revenue replacement, which included changing the period of review so that you could more closely look at a fiscal year instead of a calendar year, which could have several implications of why you didn't qualify in a particular year. So that was one update. However, in that first review, if there was any lost revenue for the city of Grants Pass, it was somewhat minimal, and not the most obvious important use of our funds, given that our revenues were somewhat stable. But examples of lost revenue could be things like gas and lodging tax, which we did see an initial dip on those, but now we're saying that lodging tax and even lodging activity is as high, if not higher, than pre-COVID levels. So not much of a reduction there. One other recent update related to this revenue replacement is that the new update allows for governments to elect up to $10 million of lost revenue for use on typical government services. Staff looked into this as potentially giving council more flexibility on using those funds, but ultimately, I'd say the main benefit of this update is that it would eliminate the need to perform that calculation every year, but it does not eliminate the reporting requirements or the applicability of the Code of Federal Regulations on the expenditures of those federal awards. So it's not just make this election and you can do just anything with the funds. But of course, we'll, if there was anything council's interested in that did fit into this category and wasn't possible any other way, then we'd certainly look at that as an option. Under, I believe the final pillar is investments in water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure, which we have already started that process with the $3 million allocated to the eligible water capital projects. But of course, there are some other options under this particular category as well. Next, we can look at the preference worksheet, which I'll pull up in just a second. Each of you were given the opportunity to input your preferences into the spreadsheet. For those that weren't able to make it work, I apologize, and we'll certainly try and make that more accessible to you in the future. But thank you for those that were able to take the time to do that. In the slide in just a second, you'll see a couple of plus signs next to the estimated cost of certain items, and that plus sign is to represent items that we know the total amount now, but those could continue and likely increase over time. And then at the bottom, as you'll see in a second, there's also a section for council to write in any additional ideas that were not already present on the worksheet. So let me get that pulled up now. So here is today's draft of the compiled information based on council's input on priorities, and I will zoom in so you can see a little bit better. There we go. This first section is what council had previously allocated, which included that $3 million to water capital projects and also about $28,000 to the Arpa survey. The next section was to address those specific motions presented by the Housing Advisory Committee on November 29th. And then finally, there's the section based on staff's presentation of March 7th. And then finally, at the bottom, some council ideas which were written in. Starting with the top section, we do have that Councilor Fazer suggested an additional $1.5 million towards eligible water capital projects. Moving down to the next category, we had 3 councilors supporting affordable housing projects. Next, we have 4 councilors supporting urban growth boundary infrastructure, and then 1 councilor supporting purchase of land for affordable housing projects. And I did want to skip down to Councilor Riker wrote in 1 suggestion for housing subsidy at all levels, which I believe could be included in the category above, but he potentially had some different scope related to that particular suggestion. So it could fall into one of these categories that have already been mentioned. And then, of course, we have those items that staff had brought forward on March 7th, with the most agreement on a particular item being to the portable parklets, where we had 4 counselors supporting that in some way, and also 4 supporting swimming pool. Taking a step down, we have 3 supporting Portland Loo at Baker Park and 3 supporting sanitation technicians. And then we had a few other items with 2 counselors or 1 counselor or none. So that is the current draft. I'd say as part of facilitating this discussion, completely eliminating one of the options is equally helpful to staff in knowing don't look at this option at all and eliminate it from future discussion. At this point, Mayor and Council, I can turn it over to you for Council to either make arguments in support of something that they would prefer, or even identify something that is absolutely a no from Council's priorities. And of course, I can answer any questions on that as we go.
Adam, I can call on people here in the room, but I cannot see the chart up on the wall, and I don't have one in front of me. So I'm going to have to let you manage that part on your own. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. I failed to turn my sheet into you, but I can just tell you now what I have for this so you can input my data. So under affordable housing projects, I had 2 million. Under UGB infrastructure, I had 1 million. Purchasing land, I had 3 million. And then I had, under portable toilets, I had 7,662. And then for parklets, I had 38,000. And then I had a write-in idea, which is capital improvements to the urban campground site. And I had 300,000 for that. And that's it. Thank you.
So it looks like a couple of people did not submit. I don't know if Rob or Kurt, do you have information that you wanted to add up there right now? They don't. Okay. So Adam, do you want to read through the items that do not have any anything notated to just see if we could eliminate those?
I can absolutely do that. Down in the staff section, the first 2 items with no support so far are COVID barriers or shields for public areas. That would be things like putting up glass or plexiglass to separate staff from the public. The next item is some percentage of the HVAC system, of which we don't know that exact cost, but it'd be based on the square footage of City Hall that's available to the public, so no support there either. Another item which I did put an asterisk by was tourism drivers, in that there's not I don't have the data to support the fact that there were not visitors to the area, and that economic impacts were likely due to other factors and not the fact that they weren't here in the city. So that also has no support. And those are the only items with no support at the moment.
Okay. Did anybody want to speak up in favor of any of those items, or are we okay with eliminating? Brian?
Yeah, I'll first speak up about the one at the bottom that I just added about the capital improvements for the urban campground site. When we had discussed the funding of this previously, we were talking about giving an amount for land and then an amount for some of the things that need to be done to get the land ready to be a campground. And just to note, urban campground is not on this list anywhere. So my assumption is that we're going to probably be using that state money, which is $1 million for that. But that doesn't necessarily leave any money for that capital improvements piece, which will still need to be done and still need to be paid for. So I just want to make sure that everyone's aware that we don't have another funding source for that right now. And then the other thing that I'll just stop there for now. Thank you.
Okay, as far as the items that had no interest,
No.
did anybody,
You jumped in.
that's okay.
That's okay.
I don't think anybody had any interest in them, but I just wanted to give you an opportunity if any of those things that Adam just mentioned caught your eye, or if you had a question about what it meant. Otherwise, he can like gray them out or something, and we just won't talk about those. Rick, did you want to clarify what your idea was at the bottom, as long as we're clarifying ideas at the bottom?
Well, I wanted to leave the prerogative of moving funds around to other suggestions that people had made, and I didn't know what was being made at this point. So I guess I could move some of that money into...
Oh, you don't have to move it, just did you want to explain to the group what your idea was?
That was Rick's slush fund.
Just, no, just hearing what other people's ideas were, and if there was something else that deserved merit, I wanted to have the opportunity to support it.
Okay. All right, Adam, it looks like there are a few ideas that caught the attention of at least, I see one with 5 up there at the top right now. Oh, you're putting the green. What's your system there? Can you explain to us what you're doing with the greens?
Yeah, the dark green just identifies the most agreement on a particular item, which is only the number of counselors that were interested in that item. As you can see in this particular option, there are many different amounts of funding, but there were at least 5 that were interested in it.
I wish I could see that, but does it range between $1 million and $3 million?
There is one as high as $3,075,000.
Okay, so we have 5 counselors in agreement. What's the item there?
This is investments in urban growth boundary infrastructure to jumpstart development. The Housing Advisory Committee did include in their motion that it would be treated as a reimbursement district with funds returning to the Affordable Housing Fund. Just included that as it was part of their motion.
Rick?
I'd like to move, Adam, I'd like to move $1 million from my other to that category as well. Thank you.
Valerie?
I can't see the amounts up there either, so I'm glad that I'm not the only one who's blind. But on that one, and I think a little bit of my thought of what Brian said is, my thought is because it was infrastructure, that if we needed to put infrastructure into a urban campground, but I recognize now that it's only in the urban growth boundary. So I thought that infrastructure could come through that, because I do agree that we probably may need to put infrastructure or something into an urban campground. I just want a little clarification on that one, where it does talk about reimbursement districts. So how exactly does that work? So if you put something in other words, you bring a line out, and then that just means that we would upfront pay for it, and then as developers came along and latched onto it and put something, that they would take the money and that would go back into affordable housing. I just want clarification that that's what happens, how it works.
So, yes, that's the way it's sort of perceived, is thrown out there, is that we would front load the development of certain undeveloped areas to help spark development of those areas. The city would form a reimbursement district, and as developers come in, we would ultimately get paid back for that impact, that infrastructure that we put in place. And if it's affordable housing, you could discount or reduce or eliminate the fees and it'd be taken up through another way. But so you could incentivize affordable housing in those areas through some kind of reduction in that reimbursement district.
Okay, and that's what I was looking for the clarity on, so that if it was an affordable housing project, they wouldn't necessarily have to reimburse the whole amount, but it would be depend upon the housing that they deed restricted into that particular. Okay, thank you.
Brian?
Yeah, just to get further clarification on that, Brad mentioned earlier that things are a little trickier if it's a grant or a loan where we're sending money out and then the money's coming back to us again. So how does that work with the allocation and spending timelines? If it's a reimbursement district but the money's coming back to us, is that an allowable structure?
So it is public infrastructure, and it's one of those infrastructure improvement things. It also happens to be potentially a housing issue if it is affordable housing. So it's an investment in public infrastructure, and so you can do investment in public infrastructure and water and sewer for capital expenses.
Okay, would it be like a revolving loan fund kind of a thing? Is that another way to think about it? Like we're putting out the money and then it's coming back and then we can use it again and it comes back again? Like, is that how it works? I guess I don't understand how it works.
So I guess we would need more time to define the full details of that, the money that would be coming in that's not served by an affordable housing project. If it was an affordable housing project, then we would backfill that through CET or something along those lines and have that as part of that. But if it's a private developer that is utilizing that infrastructure that's put in place, there needs to be an accountability for that private developer to pay back the impact, if that's what council wanted to do.
Joel?
So tell me if this example would be an appropriate use of that. So like on Allen Creek, we could go ahead and put in water and sewer with this money, preloaded up ahead of time. If there's affordable housing that's built on there, they could either not pay anything or pay it back depending on the wage level that the housing is designed for. And then if a developer had another house that they were going to sell and it was above 100% of the annual mean income or 60% or whatever the limit is, then they would pay back the funds and then we would use it elsewhere for affordable housing. Is that an appropriate, that would be an appropriate example?
Potentially. I don't know if anyone else is willing to respond with certainty on that. From a staff level, we may need to look into that a little more because the concern would be, what do you do with the revenue that's coming in after it's spent?
And Aaron, I would say ultimately today, if council did decide that this category was something that they wanted to invest the ARPA funds in, that would be excellent direction for staff on where to spend our time focusing on what that program is and if it's allowable or how much of it is allowable versus what couldn't be done in regards to this particular item.
It looks like we have a strong interest in pursuing that particular category. We might use some advice on how much funds are reasonable to be spent within the time period. Did you have something, Brad?
I was just going to clarify that the way our current reimbursement district program is funded, it's not what you think of as a traditional revolving loan fund. I mean, the current tool that the city uses for reimbursement district is truly just that. It's just, the city or the developer putting that money up front and then the reimbursement coming back. But it's not set up as a loan fund. So I just wanted to clarify that.
All right. Any other questions or comments on that particular topic? All right. What's another dark green, Adam?
I'd say the next item with the most agreement upon is the portable parklets option, with amounts ranging from a minimum of $38,000 all the way up to $250,000.
Was the idea behind that to pay for past parklet costs or going forward parklet costs?
I believe this one was going forward to look into either constructing or purchasing the portable parklet so that we could expand businesses' opportunities to extend their businesses out onto the parklets. So this would be new going forward.
Okay. Did you have something, Aaron?
Nope, I didn't have anything else to add. This is a discussion item, though, for Wednesday night.
Yeah. Actually,
Coming up this Wednesday, right?
yeah, that was actually my discussion because I did this before I did that, if that made any sense. So I was allocating and thinking, wow, I think this is a great idea. I think this, but in going through and looking at the survey and that sort of thing, I came away from it a little bit differently than I had gone into it. So I put 250,000 there because I just felt that I do believe in the vibrancy of downtown and I want to do what I can to help that. But there probably wasn't much support there as I thought. So probably that 250,000 is a little bit on the high side from my perspective. But I do support going down the road to talk with those people who wanted it, because I also recognize that ODOT will not allow the ones on 6th and 7th Street moving forward. So those are kind of out. So it would basically be G and H Street moving forward.
That would have to be defined, and we could talk some more about
Yeah.
what that program would look like Wednesday night.
Yes, and that, like I said, a lot of that kind of depends upon the task force moving forward. But anyway, so I'm going to say that's a little high on my part.
Did you have a hand, Vanessa? No? Brian?
Yeah, I was just going to ask maybe Jason if I haven't looked at the packet for Wednesday night, but I'm wondering cost-wise how much money, because at this point I have no idea because I was the low one at 38,000 and I'm seeing up to 250, and that's a huge range. So I don't have any realistic idea of how much it would cost to do this.
So it all depends on what you define as your program. If it's just the concrete barriers, you're talking, if we were to own the concrete barriers, $5,000 per site. If we were to rent them, maybe $1,000 per site. If we were to purchase more aesthetically pleasing, approved parklets that could be removed and placed each year through the season, then it would be anywhere between $25,000 and $50,000 per site. If you were looking at permanent parklets, therefore eliminating some parking, and then you'd be looking at a larger cost like that also. And so there's a number of different programs or different ways of doing it, anywhere from $1,000 up to $50,000 per site.
Okay, thank you. So it is a pretty wide range. I know there's been a little bit of discussion in the past on parklets about maybe doing some sort of matching grant program for the businesses that want to participate, so that the whole burden of the cost isn't on the city, so that the restaurants have a little skin in the game as well. So I hope that's part of the discussion for Wednesday.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Sounds like we're going to have a good discussion about that on Wednesday. All right. Another green one, Adam. First of all, does that one has 5 people on the parklets? Is that right?
That's correct.
All right. And then I see a light green a little further down. Was that the pool?
Yes, that is the swimming pool with amounts ranging from $500,000 up to $1.5 million. That's a total of 4 in support of that item.
Okay. Any questions, comments about that one? Valerie?
Yeah, my question was, and I had the question, was how does that fit in with ARPA? I mean, I guess I'm just trying to take a look at, would that be a new pool? Would that be just upgrading the old pool? I mean, I guess I'm quite not sure exactly how it ties in with the whole COVID-related business. And so that's what I wanted clarification on.
The swimming pool, I'd say there are really 2 options related to the swimming pool, in that you could use ARPA funding to pay for immediately required maintenance to get the swimming pool up and running for this season, which would be likely a lower investment in that item. Or you could also use ARPA funds toward a new swimming pool facility. The ARPA argument there being that it would expand recreational opportunities within a qualified census tract is why that one happens to qualify for ARPA.
Can you explain that tract? I kind of remember it. It's because it's in the Northeast. Is that the only tract, census tract, that does per se qualify?
That's correct.
So we could actually expand and use part of the money for ARPA to expand at that site because it is in that zone.
That's correct. And I'd say if council was, I don't have this specifically identified in the verbiage, but I'd say if council was interested in investing $100,000 to get the pool open this season to only then tear it down next year and start with a rebuild, maybe would not be an ideal use of ARPA funds on this particular project, just because you'd be using ARPA funds to destroy what ARPA paid for the prior year. That's the only main restriction that I could see on investing these funds in the swimming pool.
Okay, thank you.
Joel?
Just thinking aloud with you, the reason I put this money in, we have that discussion that we haven't finished yet. But we know whatever that result of that discussion is going to be, it's going to cost some money. And ARPA would be an appropriate use for it. The other thing I thought of, in terms of range of alternatives, you could even put it towards the Y if you didn't, if you felt like that was what comes out of our meeting on the Caveman pool. On the other hand, if you wanted to rebuild the Caveman pool, you could do that in increments. I'm sure engineering-wise, you can have an incremental construction plan, and what that would look like, I don't know, but and I'm not an engineer and I don't pretend to be, but I do know you can do things in increments and make amends for it as we move forward. So yet to be determined, but it's a placeholder for our discussion at our next meeting.
Okay, we have the pool on April 18th, so that might be a real good time to focus on what we want to do with the pool as well as how we're going to pay for it. Rick?
I don't have any problem with the discussion on the 18th, but the purpose of my allocation would be with the potential of using that money for items like a new heating system if that's needed an upgrade, and that could be transferred to the new pool so it doesn't have to be confined to just what's there.
Okay, any further discussion about the pool? Okay, we have another light green up higher, Adam.
Yes, and that is the affordable housing projects as provided by the motion from the Housing Advisory Committee. Examples including Habitat for Humanity, All Care Foundation Cottage Development, Cathedral Square, Ramsey, Nebraska, or an urban campground. 4 in support with amounts ranging from $1 million to $2 million. There's 1 supporting $1 million contribution and 3 supporting $2 million.
Okay, any discussion about that? Rick?
Adam, you can take the remainder of the other 1 million and move it up to the cottage development. Thank you.
So Councilor Ranker, I've got a total of $4 million down here based on your write-ins. And I can move 1 million.
Yeah, 1 million out of the other, but I thought we already took away 1 million before.
You might have had $3 million on there originally. So I've moved the 1 million, which leaves $1 million under housing subsidies at all levels, and then a remaining 2 million under an other category.
Oh, okay.
But with your 1 million contribution, that takes the total in support of this item to 5.
Okay, well, As I said before, okay. Let me think about it. Thank you.
Okay, can you just read through now the other items so that we get a sense for?
Absolutely. The third item under the Housing Advisory Committee motions is purchase land for affordable housing projects with 2 in support, ranging from $2.6 million to $3 million. There's 1 in support of COVID supplies, such as masks, gloves, cleaners, and etc. 3 in support of portable toilets. 3 in support of a Portland loo at Baker Park. 2 in support of isolation and quarantine time. 2 in support of COVID/ARPA administration, of which we have at least 450 hours of staff time dedicated to researching ARPA and our options for the use of these funds. There are 3 in support of an additional sanitation technician, and 1 with potentially even 2 additional sanitation technicians. And then finally, some percentage, or 2 in support of some percentage of the downtown Welcome Center restrooms, ranging from $213,000 to $500,000. And finally, on the write-in options, there is from Councilor Roger, emergency response water trailer, supporting up to $100,000 towards that. Councilor Riker has $1 million remaining to housing subsidies at all levels, $2 million to other, and then Councilor Delagrange has $300,000 towards capital improvements to urban campground site.
Okay, Council, I think, how about if any of you want to advocate for something, this might be a good time to do it, or ask any questions about what anything means or why somebody said something, and then we will plan to maybe give you all a little time and come back at this another week so that you can all get a copy of this and make your final decisions. Anyway, I'm seeing like all the hands go up. So Valerie, then Vanessa, then Joel, then Rob.
Okay, and once again, I feel blind and old, but that's okay. I think I was trying to, when I was going down to the bottom, I recognized the extreme impact on our parks. And so I wasn't sure the best place to throw my money at to try to help. Obviously, we have put money into portable toilets, and so that is something reimbursable. I can't even see what I put down for that, but so that was something that I felt should happen. I like the idea of having a Portland loo down at Baker Park, because that park gets so much use, and I like the design of the loo. Because of some of the incidences that have been down there, I think this is something that at some point it's nice to see that you have something hard that you can move forward and say you've actually bought a piece of infrastructure that will be there for moving on. And that's also why I put the technician down, I believe. It was because I know that the needles and those have been impactful down there and has caused a problem for our parks, and I would like to have them, not have to deal with that. So that's kind of why I put those things in there. And once again, I just realized that those were priorities, of getting some of the reimbursement back, but yet also having something that we could walk away saying, yes, we did get a loo out of that down in Baker Park that gets the usage that it does. So that's why I advocate for those.
Vanessa.
I'll start with the very bottom, and I'd like to encourage other counselors to support me in a request for an emergency response water trailer. At this time, in the event of a catastrophic emergency, only the residents north of the river have access to clean water. I have no clue how much this would cost. I just threw in $100,000. That's probably really optimistic for a piece of equipment like that, but I would like council to seriously consider that. I also would like council to reconsider their allocations to purchasing land for affordable housing projects. As we saw from the last presentation, this is distinguishably the most impactful strategy to support housing production. And I think we have a really rare opportunity to help jumpstart our land bank program with this opportunity. Adam, I also would like to reallocate from the Urban Growth Boundary Infrastructure tab to 1.3 million. And I would like to reallocate 200,000 down below in the other for urban campground capital improvement. Thank you.
Next up is Rob, then, Joel, then Rob, then Brian.
So I'm next?
Yes.
Okay. I had a couple of reallocations based on the discussion, Adam. I'd like to allocate $60,000 to the emergency water supply on the south side. Whether that is equipment or some other thing, I think that needs to be asked, but I think that's a good investment. Portable toilets, I didn't put anything down there. I think that's a reasonable thing to do at $9,000. And then I need to reduce the
Adam, you're on Councilor Fazer, not King, on both of those last changes.
Thank you, Aaron.
Tell me when you're ready, Adam.
I apologize. That was 60,000 to the emergency water trailer.
Right. Correct. And I appreciate Vanessa bringing it up.
And then the portable toilets, I think you said 9,000?
Correct. And then reduce the administration from down to 31,000. And I think I have $662 left.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
That'll cover inflation. Probably not.
Rob.
So, quick question for Vanessa or someone else. Why is, what's the emergency water supply for the north of the river?
Jason is probably much more equipped to answer this question, but in short, it's a movable trailer that can filter water for each resident, or I believe each household, 1 gallon a day in the event of a catastrophic water treatment plant failure. Correct me if I'm wrong.
That is correct. It's a completely self-contained water treatment trailer for supplying drinking water during an emergency.
So why is that considered exclusive to the north of the river?
Because it's assuming that in a major disaster, the bridges are going to be down, and if it's stored on the north side of the trailer, that's the only people that would have access.
Thank you. So another question on the sanitation technicians. This is for past or moving forward?
This
We
would,
currently have,
go ahead, Adam.
I was going to say, the police department currently has 1 sanitation technician with about this cost, but that's being covered by another grant. So this would be for additional sanitation technicians at $48,500 each.
So is that theoretically going to help take some burden off the parks employees in dealing with some of these issues, or is it used in a different way?
Adam, I'll add to that also. This provides an opportunity for us to get 1 or 2, if depending on what the budget is for that's allocated to this, to provide for a municipal service sanitation technician, a temporary position that's allocated through these funds and would end after these funds are over. And that would help also either public safety through their sanitation process that they have now, or parks, and we'd have someone down in parks as a sanitation technician doing sanitation work in the parks, allowing our current municipal service workers to do the duties that they were that's more aligned with their job responsibilities.
So though it would just be obviously like a one and done kind of thing, because when these funds are gone, then that position is no longer funded, right? So it's very temporary.
Yeah, that's the negative about utilizing these funds for that item. It's not that would not be a one-time capital, so it would be, like I mentioned, temporary in nature based on the usage of these funds.
Thank you.
Jason, do you happen to know how much that water trailer costs?
It was just over 100,000 10 years ago, 8 years ago when we first got it.
Okay, so we do have one. This would be for the purchase of a second one. Okay, next up is Brian, and then Rick.
Oh, I was just going to reallocate from my bottom line on the campground. I was going to take 100,000 from there to the water trailer line. And then I was also going to advocate for up top the land bank line that only has 2 members supporting. As Councilor Roger said in the previous presentation, it was shown that land banking is one of the most effective ways to use or to increase housing stock in the community. So I would encourage you all to support that. Thank you.
Rick, then Valerie.
Adam, I'd also like to make some reallocation at the very bottom. Out of the other, take 100,000 and put it in the emergency response water trailer. And then add a new line. I want to muddy the waters. A reservoir, new reservoir south of the river for $1 million. And then of the 900,000 left, I would like to move that up to the land bank for housing. Thank you.
Valerie.
Yeah, I'm just going to get a little clarification on the water, because I know that emergency water thing has been a discussion we've had since 2015 when I was on council. At one point, the north end was supposed to be serviced, if I'm not correct, by City Hall and a well that was here. Am I correct? So is that totally a moot point anymore? Or I guess I'm just trying to go back and say, where have we been since that discussion?
It's not completely moot, and in an absolute emergency, it's probably possible. This well has some incredible technical challenges, such as the wellhead is actually below grade. It's not in a location where it would be easy to get above grade. It is also too close to a sewer line that has not been constructed to be next to a well that's used for drinking technically. And so that well is only used for the heat loop purposes. The other thing is, because it's connected to the heat loop, there is some additional work that would have to be done on the water system here to make sure that it is completely separated. There's backflow here, but it's not the level of backflow that we would want to see to ensure that nothing from the heat loop system could get back into the groundwater.
Okay, so we're basically saying that originally, when we bought the one we have now, we bought it for the south side of the river because we were going to use this site as the north, for the north, correct? And now, because that kind of looks like it's not really going to happen, and then in that case, it probably would be wise to have a separate trailer for both the north and south, and that's the direction. Okay. Okay, thank you. Oh, since I have the floor, I guess.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm not going to reallocate now because I can't even see what I'm reallocating. I'm not even sure what I did in the first place. I do know what I do in my heart, but I can't see from that far. So I agree with what Sarah said, that we need to come back to us to redo a couple things. I will say that the hesitancy I have right now with the land bank, and it's not that I don't think it's a good idea, because I'm looking at, Allowable property obviously was banked in the past, and we may be able to utilize that. I look at it sometimes as one more layer. I mean, other people if they're going to sell it, if we go in and buy it, they're not necessarily going to give us a great deal just because, unless it is something that is blighted. If it's blighted or whatever, then that's great. That should be our role, is to step in and doing that. But I'm not sure how we can say that we will have that done and spent by 2020 26, because that's kind of one of the circumstantial things that you do. And if we're just going to go out and start buying up land to have an affordable bank, I'm not sure you're going to be getting a real deal. I think you're just becoming a one more in-between layer that adds cost. So that's why I need to know more about the land bank before I jump in.
Yeah, it does seem like we need to maybe have a workshop specifically about land bank options. On the chart today, not seeing any more hands. One more hand, Brian.
There's a couple of counselors that haven't given any input on this chart yet, so it'd be really nice to kind of see where they're at. And if they're not ready today, I guess we'll just wait for next time.
Yeah, I think I was going to ask Adam, if people make changes to the chart that was sent over the weekend, should they use those, or do you want to just send like a PDF of what you've got here on the screen and come back at it during another meeting, or kind of what's the most efficient way for you to get some feedback on where to go from here?
Absolutely. I can provide Mayor and Council with the results of today's conversation, probably in PDF format. If Council wanted to go through the exercise of completing the chart again, we'd essentially kind of start with this is what Council has already decided upon, and Council's priorities at this point may have changed, or certain allocations may have changed as well. So we could do either, but absolutely starting with providing you the summary of today's conversation.
Okay, yeah, I think it'd be good to see a copy of this, for everybody to see a copy of this. We have a couple of people who need to provide some numbers, and then if anybody wants to make any changes before the next meeting, go ahead and send that to Adam as well, so that the next time we talk about this, we have a relatively current starting point. I think because we are going to be talking about a couple of these items, porta potties, parklets, and then the pool on the 18th, we may find some consensus on those items along the way here, but I think we need to come back at this later in the month. Valerie.
The only thing I might say is that where we see pretty much agreement across the board on the, I can't even see, it's I think the infrastructure one in the, right there, that might be at least a direction to send staff in moving forward.
Yeah, I think any of those dark green and even the light green items, if there's additional work to be done, a couple of those are like the portable toilets that we have, more discussion on that coming up just even this Wednesday. So I don't know if staff needs to do anything in the meantime. That may just resolve itself, but I think we have strong consensus on a couple of those items, but, without really being able for us all to see the chart very well, and a couple of people who haven't provided any info yet, there may be items that have 3 or 4 counselors in agreement right now, and once we hear from the other 2, they'll bump up to 5 or 6. So I think we're just going to have to all take a good look at this and come back at it again. And some of those, one of them, 5 people are in agreement, but the dollar amounts range from $1 million to a little over $3 million. So we're going to have to find where we land money-wise. All right, so yeah, Adam, if you can get back to us, and we'll get it on the agenda for later, maybe about 2 weeks from now.
Okay, let's see, I think. Yes, I did have one more slide, but it's just the council action date and call to action and your alternatives. Of course, your alternatives are, you can, of course, allocate all of the funding now or some now and later. And as you said, we'll be reviewing the results of today and staff bringing back additional information on those items with a lot of support. So that concludes my presentation.
Okay, terrific, thank you. Oh, Rob, go ahead.
This question's for other counselors, I guess primarily. So typically, like if we talked about today, potentially moving from the urban renewal, eliminating the convention center and moving those funds potentially to some kind of lower income housing usable fund. So I'm just wondering, or with that issue, and also for instance, a swimming pool, there's different funding mechanisms that we could use for a swimming pool. So how did people, whoever chose $1 million for the swimming pool out of this, how did they happen to choose that for the pool when we haven't even discussed different funding mechanisms for the pool? Or for that matter, if we were going to move the convention center funding, or if we're going to eliminate that and move it more towards housing, now we're up at some $11-12 million figure for housing if we add up all these different accounts. So I'm just wondering how are we looking at this as far as a larger picture. So I'm looking at Brian just because on the issue of the convention center, which is a substantial amount of money to just move out of there and move towards housing. If we add up all the housing money, ARPA and the convention center, now we're up at a really large figure. So I'm just wondering how we justify that.
Yeah, I can't speak to the pool. I didn't have that one, but I'll speak to the housing. When we got a presentation a few months ago regarding our future housing needs over the next 10 or 20 years, basically what they said is we need to be producing twice as much housing as we're producing now. So, I think all these different programs and all these different amounts will give us the strength to have a sustained effort to address the housing crisis over many years, as opposed to just having, 2 million here and 1 million here, and then after 2 or 3 years it sputters out. If we have these larger amounts, we can have a sustained effort to, actually solve the housing crisis to the best ability that we can.
Vanessa?
If I may also touch on that as well, I think us choosing to allocate the funds that are available to us for housing, I think it's actually acting on the crisis and not just speaking in the language of understanding there is a crisis.
Okay, as we start to roll into agenda review here, I just wanted to let you all know that I have marked it down to get ARPA allocations as well as a land bank program workshop on a future agenda. Is there anything else regarding the ARPA discussion before we move into agenda review? Okay, so agenda review, we have a meeting Wednesday with a public hearing regarding a development code amendment to Article 12 for minimum residential density. Council action items are a resolution for a water restoration digester heat exchange, discussion on the downtown parklets, porta potties in Riverside Park, and then consent calendar has a resolution to renew the Saturday Artisan Market lease agreement, approving the financial report for the fourth quarter of 2021, a resolution to purchase a new combination jetback truck, a resolution to enter into the purchase of water treatment plant chemicals, and there's 3 different kinds of chemicals listed, a motion to propose an alley for the alley beautification project, a motion to open a request for a call for artists for the Beaver parking lot, and a resolution to terminate the COVID emergency, and then appoint a member to the Sustainability Energy Action Task Force. Any questions about any of that? Brian?
I just had a question about the Sustainability and Energy Action Task Force. I see there's 1 appointment on there. Are there other positions still open, or is that the final one?
There are, and we re-advertised, I think, last week or the week before to try and fill those others. We'll be filling 1 RCC position.
Do you happen to know what the other ones that are open still are? Are they specialized or at-large?
Specialized. All the at-large positions are filled.
Okay, thank you.
Valerie?
Yeah, I have in the past, and I have appreciated having a quarterly financial report, given a brief presentation, if that's possible, just a summary.
We thought that might come up, when was hoping that we did. I talked with Adam. He is slammed. We've got budget and all those kind of things. This is a report that, from a time sensitivity standpoint, is back in December. We'd be more than happy to continue the quarterly reports, but this one, due to staffing levels and the report, his time, I think, could be maybe better served elsewhere. But if council definitely desires to have one, we will do it.
I'm fine with that. I do understand, but I just noticed that they usually are, and this wasn't. So thank you for that explanation.
What's the typical timeline for how quickly, maybe if Adam's still out there, that he tries to get those to us? Because we should be upon the first quarter of 2022 before too long, I would think. Are you still
Yes,
there?
Mayor, this is Adam. There are several month closing journal entries that have to take place before we can close out a month or a quarter. And at the moment, due to some staffing shortages, we have been prioritizing our time on the budget process as opposed to closing these months and providing these financial reports. So that's the current situation and why they appear to be as behind as they are.
Okay, do you have an estimate on when the first quarter report would be done?
I do not. We still have a couple of months to complete before we even got to this particular quarter.
Okay. So you don't want that as a start item though, Valerie? You're good with that?
I'm good with it under the circumstances.
Okay. Anything else regarding Wednesday? Okay. And then we have a workshop coming up next week where we will talk about art along the road and the holiday tree location, as well as event funding, event planning and funding. I remembered last week there was another one that I couldn't think of, and it was 4th of July. Just because that was something that the city had put on before. So I don't know if we want to roll that into that discussion at all. Valerie?
Well, I think, and I'm going to, events, is that separate? That are we only talking about those two events? Because I actually was at the strategic planning this last week with the destination marketing organization, and at that point I ran into Evergreen Federal and Tamara and they're kind of having some questions about like the parade for the Back to the 50s, how do they go about doing that? So there are some questions that are starting to come in on funding, if there's any sort of funding available, or how the city interacts like with the parade, that sort of thing. So I was going to bring that up to you. I don't know whether that needs to come before the council, or I can, same thing. I mean, there are some questions that are out there that are starting to happen because people are starting to planning things and they want to know if there's any support or how to deal with that part
So
of it.
we can help them with the standpoint of how do they get from step A to step Z in the planning process, and we can give them past applications so they can really just take a look at what do we want to do different. We can provide them with all that information. Julie or anyone from our staff will be able to handle that. I think she does some of those event permits. And so, so that perspective, we'd be more than willing to help out and be a partner. From a funding perspective, right now, the direction from previous decisions was that the only two events that the city was going to consider, because no one else took up, was the Art Along the Road and the holiday trees. We currently don't necessarily have funding direction from council on those two items, and I need to get direction from you on whether or not we're going to continue to take on those responsibilities. And if not, then I'd do my best to see who else in the community would like to take on those, similarly to what we did a couple of years ago with the other events that we did have. So currently, right now, unless like the mayor suggested, we also add 4th of July to the discussion, there wouldn't be we don't have budgeted money for events, for community events. That was something that council said 2 years ago due to the general fund's inability to continue to take on additional loads. These were items that were going to try to go back to the community as community events, not city events.
And I think that was clear, but it was just like, knowing for them how to, what was involved with shutting down the streets and those sorts of things. So I will make sure that I get that too.
Okay, I'm not sure that it was super clear that council decided not to do things, but I will leave 4th of July off of that workshop.
Sarah, I was
Yeah.
actually going to advocate for that to be added, since we have in the past had a community fireworks event on 4th of July and we don't now. I think that's a worthwhile discussion to have. Not necessarily that we as a city are going to take that on, but, we could help shepherd that and maybe bring in some partners and get something to happen.
Okay, well, I think it was, not seeing anybody else speaking up in favor of that one, but we'll just cover these two things for next week. But I guess I understand that when the council decided to move to the DMO and kind of change the structure of tourism, that there were a number of events that just weren't dealt with, I guess is the way I feel, but maybe I'm not remembering that correctly.
It was my understanding, we did have a meeting. I mean, Aaron called a meeting with a number of different businesses and things, and they came forth and said that, we would take on. And I think at one point in time, the Active Club showed a little interest in maybe taking on the 4th of July, but then I think they kind of pulled the plug when they realized that how close it was to Boatnick and didn't follow up on it, shall I say.
Yeah, that's correct. We did hold a community meeting with some of the major stakeholders that have some kind of function associated with events, maybe not those specific events, but those in the past and current ones. Maybe it's Rotary, Rep, et cetera, that does different things. And the fairgrounds expressed interest in taking over to the back to the 50s portion that the city had responsibilities for. Of course, there's the car club that does the actual show and shine in the park. People think it's all one thing, and it's not. There was two different entities doing that. The Active Club did say that they'd like to explore the 4th of July and thought about taking that on as an item. No one really spoke up for the Christmas tree or Art Along the Road, and that's where they were just sort of left as orphans in a way. And last year, we asked council if they would be interested, and council said, yes, let's do this. But due to wanting direction, budget time, et cetera, we'd like to know if these are items that we're ultimately going to take responsibility for, and that's why the discussion is here for next week.
Okay. Well, I feel that 4th of July is also hanging out there as something the city used to provide and no longer does, but I'll leave that to council to request if you want to take that up again. Anyway, that gets us through the next week. Does anybody have anything that they want added to the agenda? Brian.
I just have a question because I see on April 25th, it's talking about Dowell Road, and I thought we already dealt with Dowell Road, so I'm wondering why it's on the agenda again.
Take that, Aaron. ODOT actually wants to come in and speak to the project. They've come forward and said that they were willing to fund the majority of the project, which may or may not change how you as the council feel about the project, but they wanted to come and talk to you on that.
And who put it on the agenda?
Go ahead, Joel.
So we met with the mayor, myself, and then Valerie requested it as well, and we put it on the agenda.
Okay, so 3 counselors wanted to get that on there?
Yes.
Who was the third?
Rick.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Anything further? Are they, during that discussion, do you know if ODOT's planning to give us kind of a comprehensive discussion that goes all the way down to Allen Creek and, or potentially even the South Y, or are they just focusing on Dowell Road?
I actually think it'll be the whole interchange area but not the South Y. It'll likely start at the South Y with the third lane discussion, but it will primarily focus on getting traffic in and out of that Redwood Avenue, Redwood Highway area, similar to what we presented, only with a little bit more detail.
Okay. Anything further? Brian?
Is that topic going, I see it says Fourth Bridge on here. Is ODOT going to have that as part of their piece, or is that something that staff is going to be discussing with us?
Yeah, I think that the Fourth Bridge that's just that Fourth Bridge corridor, and so it will be mentioned, but not necessarily that we'll be prepared to talk about it. We are prepared to bring forward a capital project during this budget cycle to talk about the study for the Fourth Bridge, because we think it's time for that at your guys' direction.
Okay, thanks.
All right, so we are scheduled to have an executive session today. Is there a motion or any questions about that?
I have a question.
Yeah.
What are we discussing in executive session?
Augustus?
So I provided to council on Friday a confidential memorandum about purchasing property using Arpa funds. And I would like to have that discussion with council in an executive session as it directly impacts the contract that we have contemplated with the third party that we're trying to contract with to do an urban campground. And there are some things that have come to light that will legally affect how this contract can be structured.
And it's safe to assume that this discussion is going to fall under the confines of an allowable executive session topic?
What I'm providing to council is protected by attorney-client privilege. That's why it's in a written memorandum form.
Okay, is there a motion to move into executive session? Valerie?
I move that we move into executive session.
Second. Joel? All in favor of moving into executive session?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. The council will now meet in executive session for the purpose of discussing those subjects previously notified for this executive session. This executive session is held pursuant